Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you to this session. And I'm just wondering, following our last session, what are we going to have in the future? Is it robots in front and robotic delegates seated in front of us? Now, ladies and gentlemen, on a global level, governance is defined as the authoritative and focused steering of communal processes to achieve certain predetermined outcomes. And it includes, inter alia, the activities of governmental and non-governmental organizations, which can occur at the different levels. Now, good governance refers generally to fixed qualitative characteristics involving the processes of rulemaking based upon their basic institutional foundations, and it captures principles such as transparency, public accountability, greater participation, and public access to information. Now, the notion of good governance also seeks to fight corruption and safeguard both basic human rights and the rule of law. Consequently, enhanced international governance is a key consideration in trying to ensure that globalization becomes sustainable in its entirety. Sustainable development and governance is key to shaping the post-2015 developmental agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. Sustainability of cities and communities and good governance has been highlighted repetitively and is included in Goal 11 and 16 respectively, with the former being interrogated in the broader context of urbanization, environmental challenges, and disaster vulnerability. The SDGs also provides the prospect of moving beyond the Millennium Development Goals, which did not prioritize aspects relating to governance. Now, ladies and gentlemen, as indicated, this is a very tight session. We just got an hour, and I will be managing this session with surgical precision. As indicated, we have two speakers. Our first speaker is Nirmala Govender, and she is the Head of Performance Management and Evaluation at the Tekwini Municipality in Durban, South Africa. Now, she is a certified internal auditor, has a Bachelor of Accountancy degree, a postgraduate diploma in Business Administration, and a Master's in Business Administration, and she is currently studying for her doctorate. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Nirmala Govender.
Professor Reddy, and all protocol observed, I want to thank the organizing committee for affording me this opportunity to present at this plenary. So, as mentioned by Professor Reddy, I work for the Ethekwini municipality, so I have somewhat experience and skills within the municipal environment, and I'm hoping that you will gain from an understanding through this process. I've been in local government now for 15 years, and it's given me quite a good grasp of various activities that are happening. So today I'm going to concentrate on SDGs, but I'm going to give you the local flavor of SDGs within Ethekwini municipality. I just want to qualify up front, I am not an expert on SDGs. However, like many of us here, we gain knowledge through attending seminars, researching, and from my perspective, from a monitoring angle. So to give you a bit of timeline on this process, I don't have a pointer, but should be okay. So as you can see, the Sustainable Development Timelines, for those of you who are not too aware, it started off in 1972. So that was quite a while ago that this whole process of saying we should be monitoring development indicators. And in the year 2000, with the United Nations, the Millennium Development Goals were adopted by various nations. So the timeline we've included in this timeline are the Ethekwini municipality timelines. So I just want to also point out that this is a very practical presentation. It's not going to get into too much of theory. However, I've used examples from the UN who are behind the whole SDG process. So as you can see, in 2016, 2015, the SDGs were adopted. Now, I just want to go through that process from the Millennium Development Goals to the Sustainable Development Goals. And in 2016, we have the new urban agenda, which is now looking at, from a city perspective, what really is the crux of how we move from just having goals to putting in processes and implementing these sustainable development processes. So I've got 15 minutes. I'm going to go very fast. I've got a few videos, and we will hopefully will make that exciting for you. So the transition from MDGs to SDGs, it wasn't as if it just stopped with MDGs and then we went into SDGs. It was an unfinished process because the UN, with all the countries, decided that there is a lot more than what we had in the Millennium Development Goals. So the Sustainable Development Goals was moving towards more sustainability issues, and as you all know, we've been experiencing that. I'll show you some videos in a few minutes. So the targets in the SDGs are better defined. We've got involvement of government at all levels, and there was a need to localize at the city level. So I want to give you a little bit more information on that as we process through the presentation. So these are the 17 goals for the sustainable development, and what it's doing, and I think this is the crux of what Professor Reddy has been trying to identify, is that it is underpinned by governance. As you can see at the bottom, I'm hoping my slides can be seen at the back, but it's underpinned by governance. And those two governance goals are the Goal 16 and Goal 17. But from our perspective as a city, we deal with Goal 11. But as you can see, it's dealing with the economy, socio-political, and the ecosystem. So all of this is covered within the Sustainable Development Goals. It also makes sure that we have prosperity, there's human rights, there's people, and we're dealing with the planet. And as you know, we've experienced climate change after effects, you could say it, to a great extent. And this is because we have not been living sustainably, we've not been working sustainably, and that's the reason why this intervention of the Sustainable Development Goals. So Goal 11, which affects most cities, is that it says that you need to make cities and human settlements. When you talk about human settlements, we're talking about providing houses for people, homes for people, as well as settlements around them that they can access community services, they can access transport, they can access jobs. That is what human settlements is about. It's not just providing a house in the middle of nowhere where nobody can access any of these health benefits, social benefits. It needs to be safe, so people need to feel safe in the environment that they're living in. It needs to be resilient. That means any changes that happen around in the communities, in the climate, we need to be able to undertake and make these human settlements more livable and obviously sustainable. So the UN in 2019 did a paper which says that that ensuring adequate housing and infrastructure, supporting growing populations, and we've spoken a lot about this over the last 2 days around the urbanization issue. We've also spoken about confronting environmental challenges and then also disaster vulnerability. So this is what SDG 11 is about. What are cities faced with? These are the critical things. So I'm going to give you excerpts from this UN 2019 paper, which says that between 2000 and 2014, the population in global urban, the proportion of global urban slums dropped. So if we're saying that they dropped from 28.4 to 22.8%, that means there should have been less people living in slums. However, because of the issue of urbanization, there's a bigger population to deal with. Effectively, what has happened is that the number of people living in slums increased from 807 million to 883 million. In terms of the second issue of, if you go back to this slide, we spoke about environmental challenges, and we see that the air quality, and I come from an area in Durban, for those of you who live in South Africa will know, it's one of the most polluted areas. We have industry surrounding the residential area I live in. We've got SAPREF, we've got NGen, which are oil plants, fuel plants. We've got Mondi, which prepares paper. We've got the Southern Freeway, which is a huge, major network, road network. So we're surrounded by pollution, and this is an example of what is being said here, that more than half were exposed to air pollution levels at 2 times 2.5 times higher than safety standard. So, and it's estimated this will increase in 2016 to 4.2. This would have increased to 4.2 million people dying as a result of high levels of ambient air pollution. And then the last issue on this was disaster vulnerability. And if you look at what we're saying, thank you. If you're looking at what we're saying, there's damages because of disaster. So I'm going to just play you a quick clip. This happened on the 23rd of April in 2019. The south of Durban was hit quite badly by the you can't hear that. Okay, can you hear that? The sound is quite low. I'm just going to play that again so you can hear. So on the 23rd of April, we experienced this huge flood in Durban. Storms overnight, and 50 people passed away in these storm-related damages. I'm showing you pictures from the area I live in. This is where I come from. So if you look on the side there, that's a road just down from where I live, which was flooded. There's a graveyard there, and the entire graveyard was actually filled with water. Okay, so you can't really hear that, but effectively that's a news report that was advising people of all the areas that were flooded in Durban and not to go into those areas because you couldn't get past it. These are other pictures. As you can see, that bridge. So in 1985, when I was just a student in university, that bridge on that side the water was right up to the top of that bridge. But this is the disasters that we have within the areas that we live in. So I just thought I'll show you a couple of those. And we also have the SDG 16, which is on governance. But there's interlinkages between the various SDGs. So I'm running out of time, so I just want to get to how do municipalities and municipal governance ensure that there are processes and mechanisms to deal with the SDG goals. So we have German cities who have 13 initiatives that they've implemented. Netherlands, through a company called VNG, where they have promoted international cooperation on the SDGs. We have Seoul, which has sustainable city vision, and we have Brazil, which is a confederation of municipalities. From a South African perspective, we've taken the SDGs and we've looked at where it can be monitored, and we've looked at local government as 98 SDGs that needed to be monitored, and the rest by provincial and national government. From an eThekwini municipality, that's the municipality I am in, we have looked at how we can report on these, and I just want to mention that very quickly. When I say report, how do we respond to the goals that are set by the UN in terms of the SDGs? And sadly, what has happened is that it's become a compliance issue, and many municipalities are faced with this issue. It becomes a compliance issue. So we want to provide the UN with information, but is that information a correct reflection of what we're happening? Are we doing anything more than what we are doing currently to ensure that we become sustainable as cities? And I think that's one of our biggest failing points as cities. We are not implementing processes and procedures to become sustainable in the long run. And that's why you have those disasters like the videos I've shown. And there's many, many different views of those disasters. That's just one that I've shown you. So within eThekwini municipality, we are also teaching other municipalities how to report. Again, it's just reporting. How do we measure? How do we report? How do we monitor? And the important thing is to have institutional reform to create processes and procedures. We need to finance the SDG goals. That means whatever we're putting into place, we must be able to finance it and create awareness. Now, leadership in most governments, and I'm speaking from a South African perspective, leadership don't know what SDGs are. They hear about it, they can talk about it, but on the ground, that's where the biggest gap is, understanding how do we implement processes to ensure that the cities become sustainable in the future. So I'm just going to go to my last slide. So for the way forward, I believe that we need to strengthen the SDG process, understanding and awareness. We need to understand what the new urban agenda is, and we need to take ownership of these processes. Leadership need to advocate and become involved, and that's part of the municipal governance process. We need to promote active participation, transparent participation. It's not about just reporting. We're busy with the country report, and I attended that meeting, and I was flabbergasted by the content in that report because it's not a true reflection of what's happening in cities. And we need to have monitoring tools for SDGs. We need to create a dialogue for SDGs discussions, especially at the leadership level. And we need to promote the implementation of the new urban agenda. Prof, I've got a video, but I think I've run out of time. So this is a video from the UN. Thank you. This is a video from the UN. You can download it, but it basically shows what institutions need to do in order to become more aligned to SDGs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nirmala. I won't attempt to summarize the key points in Nirmala's presentation because of time constraints. Let's move on to the second speaker. Professor Robert Nunn, who is an associate professor in the Faculty of Law and Management at the University of Mauritius, a visiting senior research fellow in the Faculty of Management at the University of Johannesburg in South Africa, and an adjunct professor at the Griffith Institute for Tourism at the Griffith University in Australia. He has a bachelor's degree, 3 master's degree, and a PhD, and he has published quite extensively. Robin, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thanks, Open University, for inviting me on this panel. I think it's a privilege to be here. I think what I'm going to talk about is the two concepts, governance and sustainability, and obviously looking at the key governance principle that can contribute to sustainable development. Now, people may not realize it, but both of these concepts emerged during the same year in the 1980s. Okay, more specifically, sustainable development in 1987 by the World Commission on Environment and Development. And for governance, I think there's lots of debate about where it originated, but I think the World Bank has to be credited for introducing the concept or developing or conceptualizing the concept of governance. And obviously, since they were introduced, they have been very influential in policymaking. They have been very influential in academic discourses. Okay, several institutions have had to change the framework to adopt these concepts, to borrow these concepts. However, very importantly, which I think is the biggest challenge, is the ill-defined nature of both of these concepts. Sustainable development is ill-defined, misuse, so is governance as well. And I think that's the biggest challenge. Why I say ill-defined is there's nothing wrong with the concepts of sustainable development and governance as such. Okay? But they have so many meaning. They have been defined, conceptualized in so many ways that they have become meaningless. Okay? And I think that's the biggest challenge to policymakers, to academic researchers, in terms of how do you get to meaningless concepts at the moment, okay, join them together to make a comprehensive definition of what is governance for sustainable development. Now, the other issue when you talk about sustainable development, when you talk about governance in itself, okay, there's lots of issues that comes into play in terms of it plays against those who have power. Institution, government, because as you will later see in my slide, when we talk about governance, or when we talk about good governance, okay, one of the objectives of governance or good governance is to break power hierarchies in society. Okay, so let's look at these concepts further. So I think this is what I've just mentioned in terms of the origin of the sustainable development concept and how it has influenced policymaking. Now, the word governance is very closely linked to government, but they are two different concepts, two meaning, it's two ways of governing. So when we talk about governance, when we talk about government, and obviously when we talk about government in here, you talk about institution, and you talk about those institutions using their powers to govern. So there are power structures when you talk about government. When you talk about decision-making, there's lots of power hierarchies, and this is what government is. But governance, on the other hand, is improving on socio-political relationships. And improving on socio-political relationship means it's increasingly recognizing the role of non-governmental actors, or very often termed as non-state actors in the development process. Okay, so when you talk about governance, then it breaks power hierarchies, power structure, resource hierarchies. So in summary, it involves a pluralistic approach to decision making. Okay, and as I said in here, increasing recognition of the formal and informal sector, irrespective of the level of power, is key to governance. Now, governance is therefore how to govern. Okay, so governance is the act of governing. What type of mechanism do you use? What type of power structure exists? And this is why I've mentioned in here, governance is how one gets to the act of governing. Okay, it includes interaction, deliberation, negotiation, self-regulation, and the extent to which actors adhere to collective decision. And one very important thing when we talk about governance is that there should be and there is the collective responsibility of any decision that is being implemented. Okay, so key characteristics of the governance, therefore, is reducing conflict, which is not always possible. Because when you talk about policy making, when you talk about public policy, it's inherently very political. Okay, and obviously in recent years in the 21st century, what has made policy making even more complex is the increasing role of non-state actors in the decision-making process. And all the stakeholders involved in the decision-making process, even of an organization at the society level, at the country level, they have differing objectives. And those objectives are very often conflicting. Okay? And the challenge of any good governance principle is to how do you get all those actors to work together in the light of conflicting objective, and how do you get them to take responsibility for a collective decision making. And obviously, it also means breaking power hierarchies. Power hierarchies is inherent to any society. Okay? In many societies, you have very often a corporatist model of development, a market-driven model of development. Okay, so good governance principle attempts to break those power hierarchies, break influence hierarchies, and don't forget, very often organizational resources is a very important source of power. So good governance attempts to manage those hierarchies in society, and it does so by encouraging a pluralistic approach to policy making. And I think I'm repeating it third time now. It's the recognition of non-state actors as legitimate stakeholders in the decision-making process. Now, another important component of governance is citizens. Okay? In many countries, especially developing countries or underdeveloped countries, you often have imposed planning on the citizens. But governance contradicts or does not support any imposed planning. In fact, governance supports the notion of empowering citizens. Okay, empowering citizens in the decision-making process. And obviously, if probably we do not realize it now, our citizens, we are empowered. It's just that the level of empowerment differs from cultures to cultures, from country to countries. And because we are empowered, we have become critical citizens. Okay, critical citizens is the concept that emerged, okay, in Asian societies. Okay, China specifically, where now citizens can voice out to some extent about their opinions about government. The Mauritian society has become a very critical citizen society. Okay, we always place higher and higher demands on government. And government are under pressure to meet those demands as far as possible, and obviously for political reasons. So obviously, the whole concept of governance involves a change from the notion of government that's characterized by power hierarchies to the notions of governance that is characterized by a legitimate decision-making process where all stakeholders have a say in any decision taken. Now, coming back to the core now is how can good governance, therefore, pave the way for sustainability? How can good governance help in promoting sustainability principle? I think Nirmala already talked about some of those sustainability principles established in the SDGs. Now, this is a simple table that's been designed by OECD, okay, and it talks about some of the ways in which good governance can promote sustainability. And the first principle of government, thank you, is obviously we need to have a common understanding of what sustainable development is. Now, incidentally, all what I have in the left column of this table poses significant challenge for good governance, yet they have been considered as how good governments can contribute to sustainability. If you think about common understanding of sustainability, do we all understand what sustainability is? I think no, because sustainability means different things to different people. Sustainability means different things to different organizations. So if we want to encourage, implement, or achieve sustainable development, we all need to have a common understanding of what sustainable development is. Second, clear commitment and leadership. Now, obviously, when you talk about clear commitment of leadership, the government comes into play because the government is mandated by the citizens to take decisions. The government have got the legislative power given by the citizen to take decisions. So we need to have clear leadership that's effectively accepted by all actors, non-state actors, state actors, private sectors. Okay, so everyone needs to endorse that leadership. We need to have specific institutional mechanism to steer integration. And this is where I will introduce the concept of participatory democracy. Are our mechanism, are our institutions strong enough to allow everyone to participate legitimately in the decision-making process? And I'm making a distinction in here between active participation and passive participation. Passive participation is where government mechanisms encourage participation passively. Active participation is where all actors have a genuine input in the decision-making process. And obviously, stakeholder involvement, stakeholder commitment is extremely very important if we want to achieve sustainability through good governance. And obviously, the final one is knowledge management. When we talk about knowledge management, is information exchange between one parties to the other. If there's no information exchange, if there are barriers to information dissemination, good governance cannot be used to promote sustainability. So transparency in information, clear and concise information has been found to be good ingredient for promoting sustainability. Now, there are other sustainability initiative, governance initiative that can promote sustainability. You have shared sustainability objective, and that's not easy to achieve. Firstly, because of the lack of understanding of what sustainability is, or the multi-understanding of what sustainability is. Policy integration, which I think you've mentioned to some extent that there should be coordination among all government departments. Very often policy making is scattered in all government departments, so we need to have sustainable policy integration. Okay, sustainability-based criteria. Okay, and in Mauritius, which is very sad to say, I don't think, as far as I know, we have a clear indication of, okay, we're talking about sustainability, but on which criteria are we assessing sustainability? Okay, and obviously there are some subjectivity to those objective criteria, but I think it needs to be here. On what basis do we assess whether we have made progress from using good governance principle to sustainable development? And finally, we need to have specific rules of law. When you're talking about governance, you always talk about compromise. When you talk about decision making, you always talk about trade-off. You cannot have everything. You cannot satisfy all stakeholders' demand in the decision making process. So on what basis do you make trade-off? On what basis do you make compromises? What are those principles on which compromises can be made? I think these, to me, are the key criteria or the key governance principle that can lead to sustainable development. Now, obviously, I think I don't have any more slide now, but I think to conclude, even though in theory it looks very well designed, well discussed, well thought, it's very difficult to put them into practice, and obviously because of the diverse meaning of sustainable development. And this is why many researchers agree that both governance and sustainability, they are contested concepts, which means that they are so contested, they are so misunderstood, that it is not really effective to put them into practice unless our understanding of them is very clear. So thank you very much. Okay, I'll leave the floor now to Professor Reddy, and thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Ladies and gentlemen, this session is now open for interventions in the form of points of clarification, questions and observations. But please, if you can be brief so that we give many people as possible an opportunity. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the first three hands now. We'll respond and then take it from there. Number one, number two, and the third person. Speak now or forever hold your breath. Okay, let's go the first two for the time being.
All right. Thank you so much for the presentations, and I really enjoyed them. My first question goes to Ms. Govender. You presented to us about sustainable cities and communities. I heard more about cities and urban sustainability issues, but I didn't hear about communities. Now, the examples that you have given us, I think one of the challenges that we're experiencing regarding what happened in Durban, for example, is urbanization. Can you say something about that in relation to sustainable cities, as well as how that is impacting on sustainable cities, and especially the environmental impact on cities? To Dr. Nunko, thank you. I think I just want clarity on the misunderstanding of the concepts, sustainable governance and sustainability. Is it the people that are in government, the structure, government structures, government leadership or political leadership, or it's the academic aspect? Now, how can we improve that from the teaching and learning point of view to try and improve maybe the curriculum that can contribute towards to do away with the misconception?
Thank you. Number two, and just remember, one person, one question.
My issue is with the second presenter. And basically, the first question that was posed there, more or less, cuts a bit into what I wanted to ask. The question is this. The UN is the umbrella body for the whole world. So if the UN has a definition of sustainable development, why would there be misconceptions about that? The Brundtland report gives us sustainable development, and it's very, very clear. So where does that confusion come? It's like that people have different understandings of sustainability, and that poses a problem. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So the first question was about sustainable communities and urbanization. So it is a fact, and we experience it on a daily basis, that urbanization is resulting in overcrowding of cities. Now, what has happened is that those communities have now become informal communities, especially within the environment we're living in. And the UN calls it slums, and we need to move away. But that is just saying something as if, we can do that in a minute. It's not possible because we have continuous influx of people coming into cities. And the result of urbanization, especially at the city level where we are, is that the infrastructure is failing. We have cities that are filthy and dirty continuously because of the mindset of people not realizing that they need to keep the cities clean. And the environment is impacted greatly. Now, Prof, if I just may mention, one of the topics I'm dealing with is, in my doctorate, is around urbanization and the impacts of urbanization within the city environment. So it's close to my heart, but it's something that we need to look at from a perspective of social behavior. We need to look at policies, we need to look at planning, and we need to look at how we can change people to now start behaving in a different way. And that's not going to happen tomorrow, it's not going to happen next week, next month. It's going to take a long while to do that. But urbanization is a reality we have to live with, and governments need to work with the communities to see how we can improve on living conditions and make our human settlements more livable. Thank you.
I think both of you had one question in common in terms of where the misunderstanding comes from. Now, obviously, the concept, I wouldn't say, was introduced by the WCED in 1987, the concept of sustainable development. Okay, it was popularized by the WCED through the publication of the Brundtland Report that was entitled Our Common Future. Now, the concept of sustainable development existed prior to 1987. It was discussed in the Council of Churches. It was discussed initially. Now, it was applied, if we go back to the inception of the concept of sustainable development, it was applied in the context of timber production. Okay, so the concept was originally a concept that was introduced from an environmental perspective to measure the environmental limits of development. Okay, and obviously now, if you look at the evolution since it was developed, since it was popularized, and now, everything has become sustainable development. The latest development is CSR, is seen as a component of sustainable development, but is it? The question is not easy to answer. We are bringing so many different elements in terms of sustainability that this is why I said it means different things to different people. That common understanding does not exist even with government. Okay? And when you look at government decisions, most of the government documents mention how the word sustainability. The word sustainability has been added to many things, sustainable cities, sustainable communities. But the challenge is, how do we make something sustainable? Now, if you look at the origin of the concept, and in terms of visually, it's always presented as the triple bottom line concept. So if you can imagine three circles intersecting with each other, one of them measures the environment, the other measures the economy, and the other one measures society. And any development that meets the different three-dimensional needs is sustainable development. But the way sustainable development is presented in that diagram, okay, what I call the three ring, is contested. Why? Because what the three ring model of development is saying to you, you can still have an economy, you can still have a society without the environment. It's just that how long that society will last, we don't know. But the nested model of sustainable development, which has been used to criticize the triple bottom line, the nested model is you have a big circle having the environment. Within that big circle, you have society. Within that society, you have another circle that's called the economy, which means to say, can we have a society without the environment? The answer is no. If we do not have a society, can we have an economy? No. Therefore, what it means, both society and the economy depends on the broader environment in which we lived, right? Which the triple bottom line concept failed to recognize. Okay, I think this is where the point is. Now, obviously there was another question in terms of who is responsible for that. I think it's both us as academics and government. Why academics? Because when we write papers, and I always say that, writing is very political. We interpret sustainability obviously using evidences from the literature, but we also bring in our own definition of sustainability to any writing that we do. Okay? And everything has become sustainable. In most of the papers you read now, in social science, there should be the word sustainable development. So it's been used in different words. This is what I said. Okay? The true meaning has been lost. Now, what can we do to answer to your third question? What can we do to make it more sustainable? I think we need to teach students sustainable development in a very realistic manner. And what I always do in my own lectures, I'm not too sure whether it's right or wrong, but I thought that's the way of doing it. At the very beginning, I introduce the concept as if everything is so good about the concept. And then to conclude, I say, look, once we get out of this classroom, everything becomes unsustainable. Okay? So critiquing the concept of sustainable development, putting into context the concept of sustainable development without portraying an over-optimistic picture about it, I think that will start changing things. And it's not easy to do it. I can't do it alone. None of us can do it alone. You need to have the macro-level commitment in terms of having a proper definition of sustainable development. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we still have a couple of minutes more, and I'd like to invite one or two more questions or comments, but if you can be brief, and the responses should also be brief. Thanks.
My question goes back to Ms. Govender regarding you see, when it comes, I think what I'm also picking up in my reading of sustainable cities and communities, it is the challenge, for Africa, it is the challenge to try and deal with the rural-urban migration. So for me, I think the question really, probably this is also something to think about in terms of future research. How do we help cities to be sustainable by trying to make sure that we reduce rural-urban migration? And also when spatial planning is happening, I think as someone who's working for the municipality, does it balance the planning for the rural community as well as for the cities, so that cities don't only become the attraction of people to move into the cities? So then so we then can talk about sustainability that way. Probably that's a future question for the future research and thinking.
Okay, thank you. Quick response.
Thanks. Okay, very quickly. The question arises, and there's different academic views on this, whether rural-urban migration is good or bad. And I'm sure you've come in my research I found that this is a question that cannot be fully understood and fully answered. For city governments, it is not the best option for them because there's strain on resources. Meanwhile, for the people, this is the best option because they want to be closer to services, they want to be closer to jobs. So the challenge with administrations in government is that we need, like you said, we need to balance between providing resources and services closer to the rural areas so they don't need to come into the cities, but at the same time ensuring that those who are residing in the cities have proper amenities available to them. And I think this is a national government response as well as a local government response. So like you said, it's a research topic all on its own and it needs to be really looked at. But like I said, it depends on which view you look at.
Thank you. Water flows from higher lands to lower lands. That's the force of gravity. Rural-urban migration will remain a phenomenon insofar as rural areas are left the way they are. If governments do not take steps to make life in rural areas worth living, you will have that whole phenomenon of people wanting to see what is at the other side. It's a natural attraction. Just as you will have butterflies hovering over light when it rains. That's the way it goes. So for me, I believe that it is important for governments to subscribe to what we call the concept of sustainable rural livelihoods. See what people are doing in the rural areas. What assistance can be given to them so that what they are doing is worth doing, so that their lives are meaningful, to prevent them from moving out from there into cities. In other words, the base that they have can be built on. Certain things can be done so that they can live on their own resources in those environments. It will reduce, it will never eliminate rural-urban migration. Thank you.
Thank you, Morris. Getting closer to the lunch break, it does give us food for thought. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to take this opportunity on behalf of all of us present here of thanking our two esteemed speakers for the valuable input this morning. I'm sure you'll agree with me when I say that their inputs were certainly insightful in terms of demystifying and unpacking the concepts of sustainability and also the international development framework, more specifically the SDGs. Now, ladies and gentlemen, developing countries need to incorporate the SDGs into their national, provincial, and local development frameworks. And furthermore, the SDGs have got to be aligned with basic service provision so that it enhances the quality of life of local communities. You know, ladies and gentlemen, when the MDGs were introduced, and it had a lifespan from 2000 to 2015, there was not much ownership by the developing countries. And the reason was there was not much consultation. But I think with the SDGs, there has been a great deal of consultation. So we have to take the whole issue very, very seriously, because it also impacts on basic service provision and also improving the quality of life of local communities. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you, Chair and panel members. It was indeed a very fruitful session on global good governance and sustainable development. Now, as a token of appreciation, I'd like to invite the Director General of the Open University to present a shield to the Chair and panel members. And now, Professor Robin Nunn. And now, Mrs. Govender.